My guest today is Luke Russert. He is an on-air MSNBC personality, but now he's the host of MSNBC Live Events. This is going to be fantastic because Luke brings a unique blend of political insight, personal reinvention, and news legacy. He's covered 3 presidential elections. He's the author of the best-selling memoir, Look for Me There. It's a raw exploration of grief as well as self-discovery. And I've got lots of questions. So thank you, Luke.
Thanks for having me.
Luke, I want to start with this. Civil conversations and healthy debate, we can both agree, are essential to society. So it feels like a lost art a bit. And now with MSNBC Live Events, you have described this as fostering solutions-based conversations. How are you going to curate panels that really spark good dialogue without participants devolving into either shouting or echo chambers?
Well, it's a great question. And I think that at MSNBC, we're very fortunate to have a lot of hosts and journalists and commentators who are very well versed in the subjects that they talk about. They are experts. One thing about being an expert is the art of the possible. What we try to do panels is we talk about an issue, explain an issue, get to the politics around it, of which there are often a lot, but also leave people with an understanding and idea of, for substantive change to happen, things have to go through Congress or elections have to be won, et cetera. One of the things I always tell people is that being a journalist who covered Capitol Hill for 8 years, I was well versed in how something has to come out of a subcommittee and go to a whole committee, then go through the House and the Senate and be signed by the president. So you can impact change and you can enact change, but you have to go through a process that does not always happen overnight. So I think that's a very important thing that a lot of our folks understand and our audience understands, because it's so easy to scream and yell and be angry about everything. But the work that has to go into real substantive change takes some time, and it's measured, it's nuanced. And that's one of the things that we really try to do with our discussion. We have passionate moments, but they are nuanced in their understanding of what realities are in politics. I think a lot of times you'll have things that are on television or in the blogosphere, and it's a sugar high. It's sort of feeding red meat to your base. And there's certainly a time and place for that. But I think it's much more important to have substantive conversations that are also engaging with an audience. One of the reasons why we wanted to do these live events, like we're doing October 11th in New York City at the Hammerstein Ballroom, MSNBC Live 25, it gives us the ability to connect with our viewers and our community, who we really do see as a family. These are family conversations. And to be able to hear from them, to hear their ideas, I think is really beneficial, because oftentimes when you're on TV, there's a lot of wonderful engagement. We certainly see it on social media. But I'm in the studio talking to a camera or talking to my guests. And anytime you can break out of that, it's certainly positive. We're very excited for our event in New York on October 11th, and we hope people check it out. We had one last year, which went really well in Brooklyn, and we're excited to keep up that momentum. There's really something in the digital age, and also coming out of COVID, where we were so isolated for such a long period of time, be able to be amongst people and have those substantive discussions that offer a solution, a sort of hope on the horizon.
I'm a big believer in live events more than ever. I think everyone wants that connection. When you go to curate a panel today, how is it different than doing a journalism type panel?
I'm fortunate that I work in the live event space now, and I used to be a shoe leather reporting journalist. There's always the importance of having the who, what, where, why, those journalistic principles of offering something that's factual, timely, and helping people to understand a given moment, a given story. I think where the live events component comes through is, how are people going to engage with this? And are they going to be able to have their voice heard? And are they going to be able to hear what they want to hear beyond the sort of superficial? And one of the reasons why I really like the live events is because they're very organic. Sure, you curate conversations, but oftentimes what you have talked about in a pre-planned meeting, it goes into a completely different direction. And that's okay, because you're not hemmed in by, I only have 2.5 minutes in this segment before we have to go to commercial. you can have these free organic conversations and bring a lot of diverse points into view. And I think a lot of times the people participating are more comfortable because, believe it or not, being up on stage with the microphone and being around an audience, there is a certain sort of familial effect to that that's different than being in the tight, rigid confines of television where someone's screaming in your ear, rap, 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 rap. There's almost more of an authenticity in that meeting space. And so that's what we strive to do. And people have taken to it.
I'd love you to elaborate on that. For example, if you wrote an article or a book or are on television, it's kind of one-sided.
Right.
When you're in a live event, you have that instant interaction. How does that feel to you?
I tell people when I was on my book tour for my
Yeah.
book, Look For Me There, it was nice to get emails and social media messages, and they obviously resonated a lot. But the thing I enjoyed more than anything was going on a book tour, doing a reading, and engaging with the audience.
Mhm.
I think that for people who work in TV, oftentimes, your audience, it does feel a little bit disconnected simply
Mhm.
because they're not in front of you every night. Rachel Maddow, she's talking to a million people. You can't fit a million people in one room,
Right.
right? But in this case, you can fit a few thousand in a room and she gets to have that reaction. One of the things that I was pleasantly surprised by was last year when we did our event, MSNBC Democracy 2024. It was kind of the first time I think that a lot of our talent had been underneath one roof. It was this real feeling that I think they realized just how much they were resonating with the audience. And I remember Lawrence O'Donnell said to me, "That's the most I've ever felt like a rock star in my entire life." It's good for the audience and our hosts and journalists and commentators. There's something all too human in a good way. You want that human connection and fostering that community moment. That's what we hope to do.
In many ways, you're kind of like you in particular, and some of your other, illustrious MSNBC hosts. It's kind of like the actor that always does movies, and now all of a sudden you're on Broadway
Yeah,
because you
that's a
want that
great.
different
Yeah, I'm going to steal
connection.
that. That's actually a really good comparison. And the other thing I will say is in this sort of media age we live in, where everything's become so digitized, people really like that opportunity to meet the folks who they see on the screen every single day. And
Yeah.
I think speaking to that Broadway point is like, George Clooney's a great actor,
Mhm.
but when you see him doing that acting in person, it resonates so much more because it's so hard to know what's truthful these days. Like what's fake
Yeah.
and what's AI and who's just bolstered up by. And it's the same thing in music. It's when you see some of these great musicians who go up there, just their guitar, no backing, and they sing, it leaves you being like, wow, that is a really impressive individual. And we do that in our events. We really let our hosts and commentators speak to their strengths, but also they take the responsibility very seriously. And it's a wonderful time for them to connect and shine as well.
We discussed this once before. I'm curious, what's your ideal dream panel?
Question is it people who've gone before us or people who are still around? If it's people who've gone before us, I would be fascinated from a religious standpoint. So religiously, I would want to do a panel. I would go 5 people. I would want Jesus Christ, and I want to talk with him. I want to talk to Mohammed. Then I'd throw in the Buddha. I'd have those 3 very big religions in there. And then I would have an American bias with George Washington because I just have so many questions about the founding of the Republic and then what his opinions are of it now. And then I think for some gender diversity, that we definitely would have to have like Cleopatra in there. I think that'd be super interesting to get that vibe from that time. And there's some religious connotation with her too. So that's what I would do for that. But then for more contemporary one, and maybe I will pitch this at some point. One of the things that I'm just perpetually interested in, probably because I'm a Buffalo Bills fan and we've come up short so many times, is the lessons that people carry with them and what motivates them after failure. So one of the things that I'm always fascinated by is what do people like Kamala Harris do, or Hillary Clinton, or Mitt Romney, or John Kerry, or Al Gore? I think there's so much value in hearing those stories and hearing those lessons because if you get to a very, very high place, and we like to hate on politicians, but the job is very difficult. Everyone is hating you at some point. Your family endures threats. There's so much mud thrown at you. It's difficult, but you really are trying to do it for reasons that you believe are important. But what happens when you get so close? Al Gore within 537 votes in Florida, John Kerry, one state, Ohio. Mitt Romney leading in some polls in September of that year. Hillary Clinton wins the popular vote, loses, right? Kamala Harris, that is only 107 days in her campaign. What keeps you going forward? Al Gore decides it's going to be climate change and dedicates his life to that. John Kerry stays in the Senate, becomes a Secretary of State. Mitt Romney, who easily could have retired to his beautiful beach house in La Jolla with his hundreds of millions of dollars, and no one would have said that was a bad move. Go enjoy your family, sir. You did so much. No, I'm going to move to Utah and be in the Senate. Hillary Clinton, who just keeps grinding away with different global initiatives. And now Kamala Harris, who says she's perhaps going into some sort of service later on. I think there's a lot of value in those stories because we are so quick to pump people up in the United States, and then we're very quick to tear them down. But what do you do after you've been torn down, and how are you still of service? I think there's a lot of value in hearing the losers. They're considered losers in our culture, but they keep going on and having a lot of wins afterwards. It's a win to become Secretary of State. It's a win to become the senator from Utah. It's quite impressive. And I think there is a lot of value and importance in that.
You know, it's interesting when you talk about that and how quick people get canceled at different levels and all the emotions that go into people just responding quickly. At one point, right after President Trump was shot, I posted the American flag on my social media account. I wrote, I pray for all the people who have been hurt by this. I pray for President Trump. I pray for the United States of America. I thought that was a pretty innocuous post. And I lost about 65,000 followers that day between Instagram and Facebook. And I was like, wow, I've never been canceled before. I guess the next day, after reading some of the comments, I knew what my next blog was going to be, which was if I met Secretary Clinton, President Obama, President Bush, or President Biden, I would still call them president. They reached a level that I admire. So to me, that term doesn't get taken away.
I think what you're speaking to is that we are so polarized as a country that we tend to try and tear people's achievements that were dutifully earned away from them. Donald Trump won 2 presidential elections, right? Right? Yeah. And he spoke to something in this country that has existed for quite a long time. When he came down the escalator in 2015, everyone laughed and joked and said it was never going to be possible. So there's something that happened there. We could disagree with a lot of it. We can find a lot of it terrible and hateful, but you have to acknowledge that it happened. And if you can't get to a place where we're just acknowledging the bare minimum of fact, it's very hard to move forward and keep our democracy intact.
How are you going to keep that attitude, that spirit alive in your MSNBC Live events?
Well, I think what we're very good at MSNBC is we really like to deal. Certainly, there are emotions that get tied into discussions. I think a lot of our commentators, like Ari Melber is a former lawyer. In fact, is important. Lawrence O'Donnell worked on Capitol Hill for a number of years and understood the inner briefings of parliamentary procedure in the Senate. Nicole Wallace worked on presidential campaigns on the Republican side for quite a long time and really knows the nuts and bolts. And so I think that we're really blessed by having folks who understand the real components that make up this life that we live in politics and are not just provocatory. They're not just saying things for the sake of saying things.
That's very refreshing.
It's actually, no, we're explaining to you something that happened. This is our opinion of it. You're allowed to disagree with it, but we're going to bring you that opinion with a lot of facts. We're not just speaking into the void without any backing. And I think it's a very important thing that distinguishes MSNBC and something that I think is helpful. And there's also a level that everyone tries to adhere to. And it's not always easy every single day, but it goes a long way.
Luke, you've had a really long career of interviewing people. What's the toughest interview you ever had to tackle?
So I was fortunate that I primarily covered politics. I did do some big news events like hurricanes and mass shootings. Those are always tough interviews because someone's worst moment of their life is playing out right in front of you. Journalistic side, but also you're human too. So if someone just lost their child or someone just lost their home, you feel that, but there's still an importance to the story and their lived experience and what it tells to their community or to the country. So I think those are always very difficult interviews. As far as politics is concerned, I interviewed former Congressman Anthony Weiner. He had a scandal where he was sending lewd photos over text and DM to young women. I was the first person to interview him after that had all come out. I showed him one of the texts. He goes, "Well, I don't know if that's me." And it's things like that where it's like, how do you not know if that's you? I mean, come on. I think we all would know if we sent a photo like that. And I've had other interviews like that, especially I did some of the early Tea Party coverage, and there's just horrendously racist things in going on in the crowd. And I would ask politicians about them, and they would just, people like Ted Cruz would willfully deny it. And you have to put yourself in a space of where I don't want to get into a real loud argument here, but please admit what's right in front of you and keeping your cool, which is important, because I think that the more that you can keep your cool as an interviewer and really stay in a fact-based lane, ask questions that make sense. Did you see the racist poster behind your shoulder? Did you send the lewd photograph? It's helpful because I think most viewers are pretty smart and they can understand things at the end of the day.
It's a real talent to interview powerful people, yet try to keep their power accountable.
Yeah, I think you hit on something there. There's a change that's happened. And I think that's sad. For a long time, people in positions of power, it was a contract that if they were to get the exposure, they had to subject themselves to difficult interviews with journalists. I remember my mother, who was a writer for Vanity Fair, but before that, she used to write at Newsweek. And when she was doing a profile on an actress or musician or a politician, she would get 2 weeks with them. Now you're lucky if you get 20 minutes. She would have coffee in the kitchen and be around the subjects and talk to them. And I think what you have now is politicians and people and celebrity, everything is so guarded. It's so very much they put out sanitized versions of themselves, and it makes the job of an interviewer or journalist much harder because they have their own outlets now. They can bypass what used to be the traditional social contract, which is, okay, if I want to be on NBC or MSNBC, I'm going to have to subject myself to this interview, but millions of people are going to see it. Now it could be millions of people are going to see you, and you don't have to go through that gatekeeper anymore, right? So I think it's really important that when you get an opportunity for an interview, you bring it and you know what you're talking about. There's some interviews that are different than others. Meet the Press is not Sesame Street and vice versa. But I do think that there is a responsibility to try and help our national discourse and illuminate what someone's trying to do or to talk about.
How do you think the access of social media and, I used to go to battle with people who bought ink by the barrel. Now now the ink's free when it comes to social media. How do you balance the social media equation in this with journalism and reporting and what MSNBC is trying to do these days?
Well, there's a wonderful side of social media in terms of engagement. MSNBC has done incredibly well on YouTube, TikTok, formerly Twitter X, now Threads and Blue Sky. That's nice because there is perpetual engagement. You can see what stories are hitting, what people are interested in. I think there's a lot of value add in that also from hearing from people. I mean, social media gives you the channels to hear. There's a lot of mean actors out there, but there are some honest and engaging ones, and that's really nice to see. I do think there are two problems to be mindful of. Is one, you're fishing for clicks, right? And there's so much incendiary, crazy stuff that you can put out there that people are going to click on because they can't help themselves, right? And I think one of the things that MSNBC does a really wonderful job of is really trying to stay in thought-based analysis. We're not trying to play into that so much, but let's explain this issue that is enraging folks. The other thing with social media that I think is a little bit scary is people become faceless. What I mean by that is you'll say something on social media that you would never say in line at the grocery store.
Never.
One of the things that I try to police myself is I go, would you say that at a bar? Would you say that in line at the grocery store? Would you actually say that? If I wouldn't, then I take it back. Then it's like, all right, what's the tone on TV what would the tone be? And I
Mhm.
go, okay, if I read it in this tone, it comes across as nice. If I read it in that tone, it's very snarky and mean. So I have to make sure the tone is right. But there's a lot of people who don't police themselves like I do. And I think that that can be very harmful because it causes people to get into these sort of tribal camps where
Yeah.
it's just constant rage bait and no appreciation for nuance or the deeper underpinnings of complicated issues. One of the things that I tell people, and I learned a lot of this while traveling, we like to put things in black and white boxes, but the
Mhm.
world's very gray. The world is very,
Yes.
very gray.
I mentioned to you that I was asked to be one of the community notes checkers on
Yeah.
X. One of the biggest things it makes me acutely aware of, it's not under my name. They give you this long coded name. I think it's got like 6 different hilarious names to it. I'm not even sure what my name is, but it forces you to look for facts and remove emotions and really look at the gray. Was a note necessary, or was this just a gray area where maybe no note was necessary? It was just somebody's opinion. It wasn't hurtful, or even if it was hurtful, but it was someone's opinion. You sometimes have to step away.
Yeah, God bless you for doing that. I think it's a wonderful exercise that keeps your brain fresh and engaged. If you're retired, you're looking for something to do. My goodness, what a great thing. Keep fact checking. You need it now more than ever. And one of the things that I'm very happy about is I was versed in the liberal arts. So
Mm,
I was a history and communications major at Boston College. And I, for many years, was told, well, if you don't go into finance, you don't go into computer science, your job is done. And I disagree. I think now critical thinking is a incredibly important commodity in the United States. Critical
mhm.
thinking is incredibly important to have because you need the skill sets taught in critical thinking to really separate what is truth and what is fiction. Understanding media literacy and that there are so many falsehoods being pushed out in the social media space by bad actors. You got to understand that and be skeptical and be inquisitive. It's a very important skill set to have these days, without doubt.
What would be the skills you would encourage people to try to hone to become more cri- a better critical thinker?
Well, media literacy is very important. And what I mean by
Mhm.
media literacy is it a being aware of what's happening in your
Mhm.
country, basic civics, understanding
Mhm.
3 branches of government and their role. You should know who is telling you the story, their agenda.
J-
What are they pushing, right?
Such a good.
And I think there's some people who you can come at issues from the left and the right in an honest way. You can
Mhm.
at the issues with fierce independent centrist thought in an honest way. But there's a lot of people who are pushing things that are very opportunistic, are done for their own financial reasons or to just feed into a sort of rage bait ecosystem. I think being aware of that is incredibly important. And oh, by the way, that goes beyond politics too.
Huh,
Just
anything.
it's being branded and sold. Be skeptical. Now, what I'm saying is don't be a skeptic to the point where you don't believe anything. I mean, I can tell you the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. Okay. There's a lot of, I do my own research crowd out there. I understand that and I respect it. But there's some very valuable sources like the front page of the New York Times and Wall Street Journal telling you the absolute truth with well sourced, well researched journalists who, if they screw up, suffer consequence.
Mhm.
And, I guess the way I would conclude that is be very mindful of where someone's ranked on a platform. So if a Harvard scientist is next to your uncle.blogspot, .com, the scientist should be higher in the ranking. Just my 2 cents
Mhm.
on that. Someone who's given 25 years to a field and is well researched and is usually more knowledgeable. So just be mindful of who that mouthpiece is.
Now you, at 30 years old, pinnacle of a 30-year-old's career, big at NBC at the time, interviewed all kinds of people, access to the White House, and you said, I think I'll take a break from this. And you go off and travel the world. I'd love to hear about this a bit.
You're getting at the pinnacle of my book. Look for me there. It came out 2 years ago. Grieving my father, finding myself on sale wherever books are sold. And I did the audio book too. I read it myself.
And there will
If
be
you have this
links below this podcast
angelic
behind it.
voice, if you want to hear many hours of that. But no, so my late father, Tim Russert, was a moderator, Meet the Press, NBC. My mother, Maureen Orth, is writer for Vanity Fair. And so I grew up in this journalist household, and I always thought of it as the family business. My father tragically passed away, and I was approached to sort of cover youth issues in NBC, and I took it, and that morphed into covering Congress. And I think I had a pretty good career. I won an Emmy, and I was on an ascendancy. But there was always this sort of feeling of, who am I doing this for? Am I doing this for legacy preservation? Am I doing this because it makes people happy? It's because my mom tells me I should be doing it, or it's my place in this society in Washington that I grew up in. And I always felt something missing, but I was afraid to confront that, because if I confronted that, I felt that I was betraying everything that I was. I was betraying my father's legacy. I was betraying this community I grew up in. And, don't ask yourself these hard questions. They're painful. They're not going to be helpful. One day, I was in the Capitol and walking down the corridor. I ran into House Speaker John Boehner, who I covered rather aggressively over the years. We were friendly. And he said to me, "Hey, SH Ithead, do you want to come have a meeting with me later? I want to talk to you." I was like, "Okay, sure." A few hours later, I go down to his office, and he's sitting there smoking a cigarette. He has a goblet of Merlot, reading Golf Digest. I walk in. He says, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, I'm 30-year-old reporter. You're the Speaker of the House or second line of the presidency. If I'm summoned, I'm going to come. I'm not here. What are you doing here on Capitol Hill?" And I was like, "Huh?" Boehner is trained by the Jesuits like my father. That was almost a Jesuit mind game question. Right? What are you doing here? Who are you and why are you here? But then he expanded on it. He said, "I've been on Capitol Hill for a while. I'm the Speaker of the House now. I'm at this top position. And I see people who come here 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. There's always another election. There's always another bill. They get caught up into this vortex, which never really stops spinning. And a life outside of this place, they're not very much aware of. They're just perpetually in this bubble. If you want to see other things in life, do something different. You probably should do it at a younger place, because if you stay here, you'll never leave. You could die here very easily. I've seen it. There is value in seeing another place besides this." That conversation really hit me, because Boehner was similar to my father. He, from a large Catholic family, put himself through college by being a janitor, so worked for every single thing that he had, just like my father. And here is someone who was really at the top of the hill, and saying, the view is not as good as you might think it is. And there's a world outside of this, and don't be afraid of that world. And that was the sort of validating conversation that I needed, because suddenly all those feelings that I had inside of me, here is someone who noticed them in a way, but also was giving me a sort of a pass, saying, "Hey, it's not weird if you want out of this." And so I was thinking, I went back and forth for 6 months before my contract was officially over. And I didn't know if it was the right decision. I said, this is really crazy to get rid of this career right now. And I got to a place where I was doing a story about 9/11 first responders and their healthcare, and I was all set to deliver it from the Capitol. They said in my ear, "We have to cut your story. We're going to take Donald Trump's reaction to the shooting death of Harambe the gorilla at the Cincinnati Zoo live." And that was the moment where I was like, I can leave this for a year. It'll still be here if I want to come back. It's a merry-go-round, and the circus is very much not ending. So I made the decision to leave. And my mom, who was a Peace Corps volunteer in Colombia, she'd always encourage me to travel, because she said the vulnerability associated with travel is incredibly beneficial. And I said, all right, I'm going to start traveling and get out of this bubble, try new things, different experiences. I thought it would be 6 months of solo travel, and it morphed into 3 years, 6 continents, 67 countries, which is all in the book and all documented.
I don't want you to tell a story of what's in the book, but there was probably something that you thought could have been a really good story that changed your life in some way.
Yeah. So one story that I wanted to put in the book, and unfortunately it didn't work. Credit to my editor, because he did try to make it work. We both tried to make it work, but sometimes things just don't fit in the chronology or whatnot. I was in Nicaragua, solo traveling in a beautiful country. And there's this island called Amatepe, and I wanted to go visit it. I was just playing it by ear, and I was like, oh, it's an island. A lot of people vacation there. There'll be a place to stay. Like, no biggie. I had kind of limited internet where I was. And I didn't realize it was one of their big national holidays. So everything was totally booked up. And I arrived there on a ferry, and so you're kind of like on an island. Couldn't really get out because the ferries were
And
done.
you're
So I was
alone.
kind of stuck. I'm alone. I was stuck, and I know Spanish decently well, but I'm kind of looking around, and everything was booked solid because people. It's like the 4th of July, and I see this sign that said rooms available, and there's this farm. And I talked to this guy in Spanish. He's like, "Yeah, I have one room actually, but it's the guy who takes care of my pigs. He's gone on for this national holiday. You can have his room, and you're basically sleeping on pig poo poo." And it was one of these incredible experiences because I was just so happy to have a place to stay. I was like, yes, right. And I got in there and I'm sleeping next to the pigs, and the pigs are doing pig things. I have one outlet so I can charge my phone. There's a outhouse outside and like a bucket to shower with. I was so happy because I had the essentials. I had shelter, there's food right down there, there's a little bit of a bed. And it was one of those moments where I was like, a year and a half ago, I'm in the halls of power on a first name basis with the president and the speaker of the house and all these important people. I never would have thought I'd be caught dead in a place like this. And here I am. And not only am I here, I'm so happy. There's nowhere else I would rather be because this moment proved to myself that I can do it. I can be thrown into some far flung island and not know the language incredibly well and find a place to sleep amongst the pigs, but that's okay. I was content. I was very content and very much at peace. It was a very powerful moment because A, it showed me, what you need to get by, and B, that I was kind of proud of myself. It was like, wow, this is a vulnerable situation. This could have been really bad. And I had a lot of those traveling, these vulnerable moments, but you learn from them.
How did
And
that change your perspective on what it means to be successful?
it's a good question. I think we oftentimes measure success by how society deems it, right? It's like, oh, I won an Emmy. My book was a New York Times bestseller, number 3. It was on the list for 7 weeks. It was incredibly gratifying to have that and deeply meaningful. But what I realized, at least for me, is that I think success could be sort of measured in a way of how you give back. And so what I mean by that is, what are you putting into your community that is helping the community? And there are some people who I deeply admire that are on the front lines, the most vulnerable in our society, who are so giving of themselves. They're constantly raising money. They're in the worst schools or in the worst hospitals. They're in the worst places and are really amongst hopeless causes. And I think those are incredible people. You can give back and not have to do it to that extreme. I think sometimes people hear about giving back and it's like, oh, I'm going to have to volunteer for 35 hours. Everybody has something inside them that they can give to their community. My book dealt with grief. It helped a lot of people grieve. That was my own way of sort of giving forward. I give back in a lot of different ways, but to sort of pay it forward. And I think you can consider yourself a success is if you're giving back to your community in a way which, even if it helps out one person, it is moving the ball forward in a positive way. So I think that's incredibly important because you realize a lot of these accolades that we strive for, that we think define us, they don't matter when you're sleeping next to a pig. They don't. So what actually matters is that feeling of, hey, I'm here and I'm okay. And I'm really thankful that this guy gave me the ability to sleep next to the pig tonight. I have so much gratitude for that. That's a very powerful force.
I'm loving this interview and I want to be respectful of your time. So I have a question for you that'll probably be your wrap up question.
Okay.
Okay. What's the best or the worst piece of advice that you ignored that
So
helped you see risk and success and everything in life differently?
I'll answer this in 2 ways. Number one, I think I was advised as a young guy, especially in the media world, of sort of like the value in paying your dues and going through a set system of, you got to do things a certain way. And I do think that there's a lot of value in paying your dues in the sense of learning from elders, member of your community, your good coworker, shaking hands, being pleasant, following up. All those life skills are very important, and you should pay your dues by knowing your life skills. But I do think that we're in this period in society where things are changing at such a fast clip, where many preconceived notions are not applicable in business and in media and basically any industry. There's some things that are eternal truths, but there's a lot of it's ever changing. So if you're a young person and you think you have a really good idea, go for it. Just don't be put off by imaginary hurdles that are, well, it's been done this way for a long time. No, go for it. You should absolutely do that. One piece of advice that I ignored and I wish that I had not is the value of solo travel. Solo travel is so important because it encourages a focus inward, and it also allows you to experience culture and people in a way where you don't have that sort of support of a friend or a family member next to you. You yourself are in that sort of raw moment and can really feel it. Anyone can solo travel. I got a lot of responses in my book. Oh, I'm a woman. I can't go by myself. Yes, you can go to New Zealand. You can go to Japan. There's some safe places there. You can do it. But then I've met, one girl who took a bus from Seattle all the way to South Patagonia and went through a lot of countries that are problematic at times and was more than okay. I met 80-year-old women who've traveled by themselves and were hiking and did all sorts of incredible things.
Wow.
You're never too young or too old to do it. There's such a value in putting yourself in that vulnerable space of solo travel. And I wish that I had done it when I was younger. And I wish that I had really done it as a way to deal with grief. I think that if you have something that's been weighing on you, that's been hard for you to process, removing yourself from your comfortable environment, removing yourself from your known environment, and going to a place where you don't have everything figured out, and that's okay, is an incredibly powerful and enriching thing. It doesn't have to be some big solo trip. I know that's not available for everybody, but I would tell people, like, hey, you're going through something that's tough. Drive an hour to your local state park and just go walk in the woods without a phone for 5 hours. It goes a really long way. It really goes a long way, just because you need that, especially we're so intensely connected with digital stuff, just to have that detox and focus inward and do that internal diagnostic check.
Luke Russert, I have enjoyed every minute that we have talked, those recorded and those not recorded.
Well, yeah, they were both very good. Maybe someone has the raw, uncut tape out there.
I would love the opportunity to interview you again, because I'd love to really drill down on your lessons of 3 years of travel. I've never done something like that in my life, and I bet everyone watching this would love to learn more about what that looks like and what it could be for them.
I'll just say that there's so much value in terms of understanding different cultures and communities and understanding your own self. If you're trying to process something, especially grief, it's an incredibly beneficial thing to do. One thing you don't realize is how much grief follows you around and has an impact in your everyday life. And when you travel, you have these highest high moments, these lowest low moments, but grief is omnipresent. And how you understand grief and how you deal with grief in those types of moments, the travel really showcases it. So I write all about that. I hope it helps people. I got a great response. I thought I was writing this book for people my own age, but I got a lot of responses, people in their 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. And even one lady who was 104 who said that my book helped her process grief from losing her husband and one of her children and whatnot. So you can be 104 and still struggling with something in your life. And it's okay to open yourself up and understand it a little bit and use the avenues available for you to get there.
Do you imagine doing an MSNBC Live panel focused on grief? I bet you could pack a room. I really bet you could pack a room.
You know what? That's a good idea. I'd like to get to that place, because I think one of the things we're doing now at MSNBC is obviously talking a lot about politics, but going beyond politics in a way that's more universal and mindful about the human experience. That's a really important thing, and that's something I hope to continue doing.
I really do think the more we focus on the human experience, the more politics will find its rightful place again.
Agreed.
But it needs to be part of the discussion, but it doesn't have to be the only discussion.
Correct. And I think that it's incumbent on us to try and get the discourse there, and we're trying.
Well, I cannot thank you enough for your time. I am Dian Griesel. This is the Silver Expedience Perception Dynamics podcast. I have been speaking with Luke Russert, who is just I'm treasuring this conversation. And it was longer than you know, because I didn't hit the record button the first time. So I'm just admitting to it,
All good. All good. Thank
you
so much for having me. And if folks want to come see MSNBC Live, it's October 11th in New York City. at the Hammerstein Ballroom, and you can go on our website, MSNBC Live 25, and all the information is there.
There will be all kinds of links to Luke Russert below this, including to his book, to where you can follow him on social media, and I highly recommend you do. Please hit subscribe. Thank you very much. Luke, we're moving over to the green room.
Thank you.